Let's talk a little football. The Pittsburgh Steelers in a weird spot this offseason. Big Ben declining and agreeing to a pay cut in what may be his last season in the NFL. Even with the pay cut, the Steelers have major cap issues and will have to address some of their holes via the draft. But only 3 picks in the top 125, including number 24 overall. And when you look at the highest paid Steelers in the coming 2021 cap hits, well, Ben Roethlisberger tops that list at $25.9 million. You can see why they're in a little bit of cap trouble. Joe Hayden at $15.6, Stephen Tuitt $14.9, even TJ Watt in there at $10.1, and of course tight end Eric Ebron into single digits, but still counting $8.5 million against the cap. And for more, let's chat with former Steeler Bryant McFadden and his fellow FSU alum, Danny Kanell. Gentlemen, nice to see you. Let's start with, what does he have left here, B-Mac, and what are the chances that this is his last season?
You know what, I think Big Ben has enough left to be more than a serviceable quarterback, right? Many people only remember the down games, the down performances from a year ago. But guys, remember, he threw for over 30 touchdowns. Yeah, they went in they had a losing slump. He didn't play well, but it wasn't just because he's starting to decline as an individual passer. The entire offense struggled. But when they were winning ball games, he was playing pretty good football. The defense was playing phenomenal football. And everything just started to derail when the injuries started to surface on the defensive side, and they were dealing with a few injuries on the offensive side as well. So yes, I think he could be more than a serviceable quarterback. I think he'd be a quarterback that can get them into a playoff run. Will he be able to sustain that level of production after this season? I don't know. I think the best way to answer that question will be to have this same question surface after 2021. But I can tell you this much, he is the best quarterback option they currently have in the building.
Yeah, I agree with you, B-Mac. I think, much has been made of Ben Roethlisberger and how long can he play. And, he doesn't exactly ascribe to the TB12 method, the diet, the rigorous workout scheme. But throwing all that aside, he still is productive and he still gives the Steelers an incredible chance to win. And there were times this past season we were talking about Big Ben and what a great job he was doing. But then when they lost Bud Dupree and that defense kind of fell apart, as you mentioned, put a lot of weight on his shoulders and people started blaming him. But that's what happens. You get too much of the credit and too much of the blame when you're the quarterback. Ben Roethlisberger is absolutely the best option at quarterback for the Steelers. I do think he's got plenty left in the tank because the NFL has changed. Yes, it's one thing that Drew Brees played into his 40s and Tom Brady's still playing because of what they do to their bodies and how much they take care of themselves. But a lot of it also is because of the way the NFL is changing and the way they protect the quarterbacks and the way it's a pass-happy league. And Ben Roethlisberger has such an intimate knowledge of the system. He knows how to protect himself by getting rid of the football. He knows what to do. He knows how to take advantage of the rules. You don't see as much of that escapability that you saw early in his career, but that doesn't impact him that much. So I agree with you. I think a lot of it will be determined by how this year goes, which might be how do they put the pieces around him, because it's going to be some different looking players around him, especially on that offensive line potentially that Ben Roethlisberger is going to have to be dealing with. So that to me is the bigger question mark, is what do they put around him, and is it enough to have him have enough success so that he comes back for another year after this one?
And as you mentioned, DK, he doesn't exactly subscribe to the TB12 method. So depending on how things go, Mason Rudolph, they signed Dwayne Haskins as well. So there is some quarterback depth there. So it's going to be interesting to see how the Steelers handle things if Big Ben does have problems with injuries this year. Okay, let's turn to how do you think free agency has gone for them? Given the cap limitations, DK, based on what you've seen so far, how have they handled free agency?
I think it's been pretty solid. Priority number one was figuring out Juju Smith-Schuster and trying to decide, all right, what are we going to do with him? And that was so much speculation. Was he going to be there? Was he not going to be there? And the fact that he's going to be back, at least you put that to bed for another year. So I think, and to get him on a pretty reduced rate, to have him come back at a 1-year deal for $8 million was huge. Getting Big Ben to reduce his contract, to reduce his salary, to free up some space, I thought was big. But as you mentioned, Jeremy, their just wasn't room for that splashy, big name free agency signing. So more of it was by necessity and to kind of buy yourself more time with Juju Smith-Schuster. So I think you kind of have to grade them on a curve of what they've been working with. So I would say it was a solid B, considering the limitations they had as far as the salary cap is concerned.
Yeah, I agree with you. They didn't have a lot of resources available, and because of that, we did not expect to see the Steelers be extremely aggressive during their free agency period. But they were able to retain one of their best players on the offensive end. Losing Bud Dupree was not a big surprise because we all knew that the production he was able to display for the team, even with that season-ending injury, would command a real nice hot market for him, and being able to retain his services were not likely. So getting Juju Smith-Schuster back in a team-friendly deal was a plus. You look at some of the other notable names they lost. Mike Hilton got a nice payday to Cincinnati. The likelihood of them losing James Conner is likely as well. You brought back Cameron Sutton to replace Steven Nelson, who they released to free up some cap space as well. So they've been able to do a pretty good job considering how strapped they were when it came to the financial terms. And like you said, also getting your franchise quarterback, future Hall of Famer Big Ben, to basically get to take a reduction in pay to be able to free up space to address at other positions.
So when you take a look at the draft, as mentioned, they have 3 picks in the top 25. Sitting at number 24 overall is where they're going to draft. We'll talk about that specific spot in a second. But in terms of their needs in the overall draft, what's their biggest need in the upcoming draft here, B-Mac?
The biggest need for the Pittsburgh Steelers is offensive line. Right, that's the biggest need when you look at all the units, especially on the offensive line. And the reason why I say that is because they lost the quarterback of the offensive line unit in Marquise Pouncey, who decided to retire. You look at the tackles, they have some depth issues there. Not to mention the most experienced tackle that will return for this team is Zach Banner. And remember, he had a season-ending injury a year ago. So you don't know exactly where he will be when it comes to the health. So they have to address the offensive line. I can easily see them taking an offensive tackle and a center at some point in time in the first 4 rounds of this upcoming draft, because depth is a big time concern. Outside of that, you have the running back, quarterback, cornerback, but the biggest need for me, it has to be the offensive line.
I totally agree. The Alejandro Villanueva situation still up in the air. Marquise Pouncey retiring. I think it's imperative. And Ben Roethlisberger getting older, where again, we just talked about his lack of mobility or the fact that he can't scramble around and just brush off guys like he used to. I think that's a vital, critical position that they've got to, and especially center, which is a lot to ask a rookie center to come in to contribute. But Marquise Pouncey was such a stable force in the center, in the middle of that offensive line. The center, as you mentioned, B-Mac, is the quarterback who's doing the communicating. Now, if you have a younger center, Big Ben can monitor that and kind of help a young center along, but it's critical to get somebody in there who you spend some pretty good draft capital on, so you know you're getting somebody you could build around, because whoever long Ben plays or not, that offensive line, you want to have it intact in case one of these younger quarterbacks comes in and has to play. So I had offensive line, I'm totally with you. I also had edge rusher. You know, with Bud Dupree was a premier pass rusher. I thought you really saw the impact he had on that defense was evident when he left. I do think TJ Watt needs somebody on that other side. So I wouldn't surprise, and this is a team that led the NFL in sacks last year with 56. So I wouldn't be surprised if they try to add to that pass rush, try to get somebody to add to that pass rush, because we know they like to get after the quarterback. And then, we've talked a lot about Big Ben. I think maybe in the later picks, or there's some whispers about where they could go at quarterback. I think you've got to at some point address the future. And they did somewhat with signing Dwayne Haskins, but that's basically a freebie. They bring him in to get a free look at him. I wouldn't mind them spending some draft capital on the future at quarterback either, because you might be able to find some value with a low pressure situation where you can watch Ben, groom behind him, and be ready to go whenever he decides to ride off into the sunset.
Okay, well, we're going to talk about the back end of the draft after the first round coming up, Danny. You're getting ahead of things here. We're trying to move things along in a portioned out way. So when you're at the front end of the NFL draft, particularly in the first round, I mean, you don't want to say there's no brainer picks, but you know if you're in that 10, 15, anywhere in that range, you've got picks that kind of fall towards you. But when you're in the back end of the draft, that's when you're really going to count on your scouting and how things have materialized in that area. They're at 24. So who should they be targeting at 24 overall, Danny?
So I think you make a great point, Jeremy, because if you look at a lot of mock drafts, and I think the actual draft will mirror this, there's a lot of agreement in the top 10. And then when you get past that, and some of it's need-based, like a team will say, you know what, we're gonna pass on this player because we need this position. But I think that's where a lot of the disparity grows. So I had a couple players in mind at 24 that I would like to see them go after. One on the defensive side of the ball is Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah from Notre Dame. Phenomenal linebacker who can make it as a difference maker on the defensive side of the ball, is a hybrid type player who can play a lot of different positions for you, has a knack for getting after the quarterbacks. The other guy I had was Gregory Rousseau, who, to your point, Jeremy, might not be available at 24. You know, earlier before this season, he was a top 10 projected pick. Then he opted out. People kind of forgot about him. But you could see a team that fell in love with him, so he might not be available. But just a sheer pass rusher in his one season at Miami, 15.5 sacks. He was spectacular. He could fill that void Bud Dupree left pretty significantly. And then another defensive player is Zaven Collins out of Tulsa. Not many people know about him because he didn't play at a Power 5 school, but you talk about a ball hawk, a guy who's absolutely flying around, always has a knack for the football, whether it's getting sacks, getting strip sacks, interceptions, kind of a do-it-all type of player that I could see would fit in great with the Steelers in that defensive scheme. So I'm focusing more on the defensive side at the 24th pick because I think that's where they should spend the capital here at 24.
Well, for me, when you look at the players that potentially could be available, I start with an offensive weapon. A guy that terrorized the entire ACC, a guy that terrorized college football defenses that faced them every Saturday. And Travis Etienne, he's a home run hitter at the running back position. The Pittsburgh Steelers haven't had an explosive home run hitter at the running back position since Fast Willie Parker, who I played with. Not to mention he's a quality sound pass catcher out of the backfield. So they need to be able to become more explosive. That offense, they haven't had that ability in years past. So being able to kind of change the game a little bit from what we've grown accustomed to seeing will be huge for Big Ben's development and the entire offense development and being consistent and being able to put points on the scoreboard. And if Travis Etienne is not there, then you focus on the defensive side at the edge rushing position. Jalen Phillips. You talked about Greg Rousseau as a potential pick for the Steelers. Jalen Phillips, 6'6", 260, ran 4.56 at his pro day. Yes, they have to fill the shoes that were left by Bud Dupree. Man, number 15 from 2020 made you kind of forget about number 15 from 2019. Because he played phenomenal football for Miami. So those are the two positions I think that the Steelers will target if they're available. I mean, if Travis Etienne is there at number 24, you jump and send that card in. If he's not available, if Jalen Phillips is there, you do the same thing. You jump and send that card in because I believe both players will be difference makers in their rookie campaign.
And to the structure of your team as well. If you have a strong running game, it takes pressure off Big Ben to accomplish things down the field. So having a guy like Travis Etienne certainly would help. Okay, so let's talk about days 2 and 3. Danny already mentioned that, the quarterback is a position that needs to be addressed. But for BMAC, for you, what do the Steelers need to do on 2 and 3?
It depends on what happens in the first round. I gave you two scenarios in the first round that they can go, different directions they can go. But at some point in time, when you look at day 2, day 3, day 4, they got to address the offensive line position. Center Creed Humphrey would be a nice addition to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Javonte Williams, if they're not able to get a running back in the first round, second round, whatever the case may be, he will be a nice addition. I think he will go in the second round. Kenneth Gainwell, a do-it-all type of running back, but he's extraordinary in catching the football out of the backfield. He will be a big-time addition to the Pittsburgh Steelers. And then you go to Big Ben Cleveland. All he did was just railroad opposing defensive linemen throughout his SEC career there at the University of Georgia. So all 4 names will be names to monitor when you look at day 2, day 3, day 4, because I think those are positions of need for the Pittsburgh Steelers.
B-Mac, I'm going to sound a little bit like old Pete Prisco. I love Travis Etienne. I don't know about 24, though, on a running back. That just seems a little bit too pricey. So I like your backup plan, though, in getting somebody in the second round at running back or later where you can find somebody who may not be quite the difference maker, but the drop-off won't be that much. So I had Ramondre Stevenson of Oklahoma, a player who made a massive difference in that system, missed a couple games, then he comes back, and it really settled in Spencer Rattler for them. I loved him there. I mentioned the quarterback. Now, you can go two routes. Kellen Mond, you might have to spend a second-round pick on, which might be a little bit of reach this early, especially since you have Dwayne Haskins. But if you wanted to add some depth and get a project and somebody who's a body type kind of like Ben Roethlisberger, I wouldn't mind a flyer on Kyle Trask later in the draft. One of the secrets, one of the best-kept secrets of the draft, had a massive Senior Bowl, was Quinn Miners, an offensive lineman out of Wisconsin Whitewater, a Division III school. He lit up people at the Senior Bowl, really turned a lot of heads. And then Lander Dickerson, who was an incredible center for Alabama. I think this could be the future. And if you had a chance to get him outside of the first round, I think this is the type of player you saw when he got hurt at Alabama. The entire team came out there. He's a fun guy. He's incredibly athletic. He's doing cartwheels in the back of Mac Jones TV interviews. He is coming off that injury, but he's an outstanding player with a little bit of an edge to him that could bring some stability to that offensive line and could be the future at center for the next 10 years. So those are my kind of guys to look at for the lower rounds for the Steelers.
12-4 record for the Steelers in 2020. They won 11 games in a row and then only won one of their last 5. So some challenges ahead for the Steelers as they approach the NFL draft. Bryant, McFadden, Danny Kanell, hang on. We're not done talking some football. We got more coming up. And we're going to talk about the Giants, the expectations for Daniel Jones in year 3. We're going to talk about that. But in terms of the Vegas outlook for the Steelers to win the Super Bowl, well, I mean, there's some long odds there, plus 3,000. Winning the AFC, plus 1,500. They are favorites to make the playoffs, plus 135, minus 160 to miss the playoffs.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.